Let's jump into D&C 132, Part 2. When was this revelation written? Why was it written? What does it say? We've already explored a little bit about the first part, and you know the original context of Joseph having some JST questions. Probably the February or March of 1831, that's when he was doing Genesis. It's probably when he first learned about it, or first asked the question about polygamy. But how come it wasn't written until much, much later? Look at your section heading. When was it written?
July 12, 1843.
There is a decent amount of time that went between 1831 and 1843. It does not commit it to paper until 1843. When he finally did commit it to paper, Hiram Smith, his brother, asked him if he would use the Urim and Thummim so he could get it right. Joseph said, I don't need to use the Urim and Thummim because I have it perfectly in my mind. I assume he had it perfectly in his mind from 1831 until 1843. Obviously, as we read this, there are elements in here that would not have been in there in 1831, those dealing with Emma Smith, particularly that are very much tied to the circumstances of 1843. So we probably call this a blend or a weave as well. What's going on with Emma Smith? Well, there are two people that Joseph loves like crazy in 1843 that he's trying to convince that plural marriage is a commandment from God. He's already started teaching it to people. He's even practiced it some, starting back in the 1834 to 1836 time period, somewhere in there. We'll give you all way more details about that in a minute. But his two closest people, Hiram Smith and Emma Smith. Hiram is his associate president. Emma is his wife. Hiram did not believe that Joseph was really practicing that. Joseph did not teach Hiram Smith about this until 1843. And when he taught it to Hiram, Hiram said, the principles in that are so clear and so beautiful and so obvious that I think any rational human, or at least member of the church, would see the justification for plural marriage. Emma went back and forth, as you know. She had sacrificed so much for the cause to be with Joseph. She sacrificed a life of ease and probably privilege to elope with Joseph. All she had as a consolation for all of her sacrifice was she had Joseph and the hope that went along with him. Now she was being asked to share him. She understandably struggled with that. And she would be on again, off again with this. In May 1843, in one of her on-again moments, she and Joseph were married for time and all eternity. And she was struggling again with it. Hiram said, Joseph, maybe if we wrote it down, I could go and talk to Emma, and I'll read it to her and I'll convince her that she doesn't have to worry about this, and it's totally true, it's from God. So they walk in, William Clayton wrote the original down. They walked in, William Clayton tells the story. He's the one that told us about that conversation. And he says that Joseph said, okay. That's when Hiram said, use the Urim and Thummim. He said, I don't need to. You ready, William? He said, I'm ready. So he spoke slowly the entire revelation. Then he asked William to read it back to him slowly, which William did. At which point Joseph pronounced it correct. He then handed it to Hiram. Hiram says, I got this. And Joseph says, you don't know Emma like I do, Hiram. Good luck. William Clayton says that Joseph and he just sat in his store, in his office, for some time until Hiram came back. Joseph looked at him, said, how'd it go? And Hiram's like, I just took the severest scolding of my life. I just received the worst tongue lashing. Joseph smiled and said, I told you, you didn't know Emma like I did. He's like, man. Over the next few days, Newell K. Whitney came in, and he found out what they were talking about, and he said, would you mind if I made a copy of that revelation, Joseph? Joseph said, I don't see any problem with that. So Joseph C. Kingsbury wrote it down. He and Newell K. Whitney worked on it, and he had a copy. Joseph put the copy that William Clayton wrote in his pocket. Over the next 2-3 days, he later told William Clayton that Emma nagged on him so many times that he would give her that revelation so that she could throw it in the fire, that finally he said, "Go for it." She took it, threw it in the fire apparently. So the only surviving copy is the one that Noel K. Whitney made, thankfully. And Joseph apparently, felt good that I've got it here. I can redictate it anytime I need to. But of course, if he dies, that's a problem. So this will be put into the Doctrine and Covenants in 1876, part of the big overhaul of the Doctrine and Covenants. There used to be a section in the Doctrine and Covenants that was written kind of like section 134. That was just written by council while Joseph was gone in Canada. The one about we believe about the governmental things, we believe this about government. There was also another one written about marriage, and in there it said we believe marriage between one man, one woman. The time 132 was put in there. That section was taken out and has never been replaced, or never been put back. Once plural marriage was done away with, this still stays in the Doctrine and Covenants to this day. So sex and religion. Let's talk about this. Talk about powder keg. This is an explosive topic. And whenever you put these two together, it is easy fodder, easy target for anti-Mormons, yeah? So this is what this is what's going on out there on the old internet. You look at that and you're just like, that's wrong. It was 35 wives, not 33 wives. But no. But this is, the caricatures are so easy, right? Low-hanging fruit. There could only have been one motive for Joseph and the early leaders of the church. The enemies of the church think they know the reason for plural marriage. But the reasons that they give don't fit the historical Joseph. They don't fit the people that were involved in it. They don't fit the story that they tell. And so let's look into that. And we're going to get into these, to the Revelation in 132 here. I like to do this as 20 questions with my students. Let's go through the hardest questions about polygamy that there are. And by the time we're done, if you have any more questions, we'll talk. So question 1 is, when does Joseph first learn about plural marriage? What's his reaction? We know, the reason we know it's as early as 1831 is because he had told, Lyman Johnson, he was living in the house of the Johnsons, he told Lyman Johnson, who told Orson Pratt, that it was a correct principle. Joseph declared to Lyman that God had revealed it to him, for the time had not come to teach or practice it in the church, but the time would come. Interesting. We know it's recorded way over there. We've talked a little bit about the reason why it wasn't recorded until then. It was the immediate circumstance with Emma that drew it forth, hopefully to convince her to live it. What was his reaction? Joseph Smith's reaction over here. Later, one of his plural wives said, Lucy Walker Smith, says that Joseph, quote, had his doubts about it, for he debated it in his own mind. Eliza R. Snow Smith, another one of his plural wives, says that he was afraid to promulgate it. When she says it was in a private interview with my brother Lorenzo Snow that the prophet unbosomed his heart and described the trying mental ordeal he experienced in overcoming the repugnance of his feelings, the natural result of force of education and social custom relative to the introduction of plural marriage. He knew the voice of God, he knew the commandment of the Almighty to him was to go forward, to set the example and establish celestial plural marriage. He knew that he had not only his own prejudices and prepossessions to combat and to overcome, but those of the whole Christian world stared him in the face. But God, who was above all, had given the commandment, and he must be obeyed. She says, yet the prophet hesitated and deferred from time to time until an angel of God stood by him with a drawn sword. Some people mock about this imagery, but it comes from those that were like closest to Joseph. Like this is He really talked about an angel with a drawn sword. Told him that unless he moved forward and established plural marriage, his priesthood would be taken from him and he should be destroyed. This testimony not only bore up my brother, but also to others. Yeah, one of them was another wife, married Elizabeth Lightner Smith. An angel came to him, Joseph, and the last time he came with a drawn sword in his hand and told Joseph if he did not go into that principle, he would slay him. Joseph said he talked to him soberly about it, and he told him it was an abomination, Joseph did, to the angel. And he quoted scripture to him. He said in the Book of Mormon, it says it's an abomination right there, in Jacob too. This is fascinating to think of Joseph baiting with an angel. Joseph said the angel came to me 3 times between the years of 1834 and 1842. And he said I was to obey that principle or he would slay me. Another one from Erastus. Erastus reported that the angel accused the prophet of, quote, being neglectful in the discharges of his duties, and spoke of Joseph having to plead on his knees before the angel for his life. Benjamin F. Johnson. Joseph waited until an angel with a drawn sword stood before him and declared that if he longer delayed fulfilling that command, he would slay him. Helen Mar Kimball Smith, she's the 14-year-old that he married. She says, had it not been for the fear of God's displeasure, Joseph would have shrunk from the undertaking and would have continued silent as he did for years, until an angel of the Lord threatened to slay him if he did not reveal and establish the celestial principle. Joseph put off the dreaded day as long as he dared. Uncharacteristic of Joseph Smith, whose motto was, if the Lord commands, do it. He did that really well with pretty much every commandment, except for one. Except for one. Question number 2, what was the Lord's doctrinal explanation to Joseph for plural marriage? Now we get to section 132. Here's the doctrinal, he gives 4 doctrinal reasons. 4 doctrinal reasons. I'd mark them. I have students mark these. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's look at the first one. Verses 34 to 36 and 50 through 51. He likens this, the precedent after he's built the house of understanding about eternal marriage, as he now shifts and starts to explain how plural marriage is sometimes okay. He uses the image of Abraham being commanded to sacrifice his son. And the Lord says, it's commanded, thou shalt not kill, verse 36. Abraham, however, did not refuse, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. Remember, Joseph's original question was about adultery. Is this not adulterous? He had received section 20 already that condemned adultery. And so we have kind of this tension of Abraham sacrificing his son. When it is a command not to kill, Abraham's wife Sarah also gave Hagar to Abraham. And that was not considered adultery. So he frames it within the Abrahamic sacrifice there, right? And over in verses 50, 51, the Lord invokes this imagery again. I have seen your sacrifice, I will forgive your sins. I have seen your sacrifice in obedience to that which I told you. Go therefore, and I make a way for your escape, as I accepted the offering of Abraham and his son Isaac. Verily I say unto you, a commandment I give unto my handmaid Emma Smith, your wife, whom I have given unto you, that she stay herself, and partake not of that which I commanded you to offer unto her. For I did it, saith the Lord, to prove you all, as I did Abraham, and that I might require an offering at your hand by covenant and sacrifice. So I think it's pretty solid to say that one of the reasons was to prove and to try and to purify the hearts of those who were involved. John Taylor, when he first learned about it, watch the Abrahamic test with him. I had always entertained strict ideas of virtue. I felt as a married man that this was an appalling thing to do. The idea of going and asking a young lady to be married to me when I already had a wife. It was a thing calculated to stir up feelings from the innermost depths of the human soul. I had always entertained the strictest regard of chastity. Hence nothing but a knowledge of God and the revelations of God and the truth of them could have induced me to embrace such a principle as this. Repugnant. What similarities do you see between the Abrahamic sacrifice of his son Isaac and the introduction of plural marriage in the living?
Goes against your conscience, almost.
Good.
Seems to contradict God's commandment.
Seems contradictory. Goes against my natural inclination. Good.
Involves family.
What's that?
Involves family.
It's your family. This is like pulling on this most sacred of relationships. Good. Yeah, I think this is a great image to evoke, right? It's only right when God commands it through the prophet. It looks wrong from an outsider's perspective. It offends our sensitivities, brings loyalties into conflict, with family loyalty. It requires one's love of God to transcend one's love of everything else. Right? It requires us to trust God above all else. Would you guys say that this is still an Abrahamic test? Polygamy? Is this still tugging and pulling on the hearts of people today? Is it still testing people's trust in God and the church? Members of the church, is it testing their trust in God? Yeah. Has anyone ever left the church in our day in the last year, 5 years, month, because of plural marriage and what they've found out about it? Yeah, so I'd say this is still an Abrahamic test for us today. It's troubling. If you're not bothered by plural marriage, then you're different than Joseph Smith, Emma. You're different than John Taylor and Brigham Young and others who struggle with this like crazy. I think it's still a test that's testing our trust in God and His prophet. Maybe I'd amend just as it did the original saints. Maybe it's not just in the same way, but it still does. So this is reason number one, scripturally, why I gave this. Reason number two, verse 40 and 45. Reason 2, 40 and 45. You'll see the common phrase. What's the common phrase in 40 and 45? This he's doing to restore all things. Benjamin F. Johnson said, in 1835 in Kirtland, I learned from my sister's husband, Lyman R. Sherman, who was close to the prophet and received it from him, that the ancient order of plural marriage was again to be practiced by the church. That's pretty early, 1835. But he's calling it the ancient order. Helen Mar Kimball Smith. In 1841, Joseph astonished his hearers by preaching on the restoration of all things, and said that as it was anciently with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so it would be again. Ooh. That has implications for plural marriage. So that's reason number two. Don't need to go too long on that one, but just it's clearly stated. Reason number three, verse 63, also 30, 34, 37. 63 is the most clear. I would go down about 6 lines where it says to multiply and replenish the earth. To multiply and replenish the earth. The only reason ever given in the Book of Mormon, right? When Joseph was arguing that the Book of Mormon called it an abomination, I'm sure the angel could have argued back. Keep reading. There's a few more verses later where the Lord says, if I command you to raise up seed unto me, then I'll command my people to alter that. Otherwise, hearken unto this law of one man, one wife. But there is such a caveat, and that's invoked in section 132. Did it work? Did it raise up seed? It did. Here's Joseph F. Smith picture I was talking about yesterday. There he is. Lives, posterity. That's just one example. Do any of you guys know if you are here because of plural marriage? Do you exist because of plural marriage? Is that true? I am. Maybe. Just found out. Sounds like it worked. Do you have a testimony that plural marriage is true? That it happened? Do you have a testimony that the purposes for which it was restored worked? Are you grateful for it? Yeah. We are uncomfortable with our polygamous past. Let's just work on this. We don't talk about it. We don't like it. We don't like to talk about it because it's got the Abrahamic test part, and it's like, oh, there's like good that came out of it. the Lord, that was intentional for that good to come out of it. A lot of good came out of that. You came out of that love. Reason number 4. Verses 16 through 20. This is part of we learned the law here. It's part of the building the house. We learned that for exaltation for everybody who lives, you must be sealed by the Holy Spirit promise in an eternal marriage unit. Now, verse 63 says, so that's the monogamous application. Verse 63 says, this is kind of right in the middle of like a hypothetical situation about whether or not it's adultery or not, but let's kind of pick it up. Let's start in 62 just for context. If he, a man, have 10 virgins given unto him by this law, he cannot commit adultery, for they belong to him, and they are given unto him, therefore he is justified. But if one or either of the 10 virgins, after she is espoused, shall be with another man, she's committed adultery. It's unauthorized. And shall be destroyed, which is strong language in this section. I believe destroyed means cut off from the covenant. We know that there's no such thing as the actual destruction of a soul, right? But probably that means cut off from the covenant. For they are given unto him to multiply and replenish the earth. There's reason number 3. According to my commandment, and to fulfill the promise which was given by my Father before the foundation of the world, and for their exaltation in the eternal worlds. For whose exaltation? The women, these 10 hypothetical women in this case. It's for their exaltation in the eternal worlds, that they may bear the souls of men, for herein is the work of my Father continue, that he may be glorified. So I put it like this: it's for the exaltation of all faithful women. There are women who would otherwise not be married. So if everyone needs to be married to someone, then this would be a way for their exaltation, to have these hypothetical 10 women associated with this one man. Now opens up the celestial highest degree for all 10 of those women. Yeah, you following this?
So there's going to be a lot less men? I'm just trying to do the math.
This is not a commentary on
Oh.
gender statistics, but just simply that this law will enable everyone, especially even if the numbers aren't even, right? It would enable everyone to have exaltation.
So I'm in the older singles ward, the 31 to 45-year-olds.
Yeah.
It's mostly women.
Yeah.
In the singles ones, yeah. A lot of the men, there's a few men in there, and there are issues there.
Yeah.
A lot of pornography, and just a lot of the men have gone inactive.
Yeah, do you guys think there's going to be more faithful women than men?
Always thought that.
You were always taught that?
I always thought that.
Oh, you always thought that?
Yeah, I was not.
I don't know. I've heard really good arguments against that. But we'll see, right? I'm not sure that's what he's talking about here. People have mentioned that, but anecdotally, you have something you're thinking about that could suggest that, right? Maybe that'll be the case, maybe not. Question number 3. Who was Joseph's first plural wife, and how did that go? Y'all know the answer to this? You know the answer to both questions. Answer number 1 is? Fanny Alger. Answer to the second part is? Not good. So let's walk through this. So when did he marry her? Sometime between 1834 and 1836. Somewhere right there. We're in Kirtland. Remember 1836 is Kirtland Temple. So kind of ramping up for that.
So is this 7 years before he told Emma about this revelation?
Right. Okay. So why did he marry her then? He learned about it in 1831. Why does he not act on it until 1834 to 36? Remember? Joseph said, the angel came to me 3 times between the years of 1834 and 1842 and said that I was to obey that principle or he'd slay. So that could have got the ball rolling. 1834, the angel's like, it's time, Joseph. Right. So we'll put angel number 1 right there. Angel 1, sometime in that time period. Let's talk about Fanny. What do we know about her? Who is Fanny Alger? She was a 19 or 20-year-old housemaid in the Smith home in Kirtland. Emma was very fond of her. When did he marry her? We've put those dates out there. Who performed the marriage? Levi Hancock, Fanny's uncle. He gave her to Joseph, repeating the ceremony as Joseph repeated to him. What happened then? Okay, so here's that dodgy source that Stephen Harper was talking about, the William E. McClellan source. That's how many years later? I can't remember. 1872, it says right at the time. In an 1872 letter from William McClellan to Joseph Smith III, McClellan recalled details of an 1847 conversation with Emma Smith, where Emma acknowledged that in the spring of 1836, 1834, 1836, somewhere in there, she missed Joseph and Fanny Alger. She went to the barn, saw him and Fanny in the barn together alone. She looked through a crack and saw, quote, the transaction. She told me this story too was verily true. What do you think?
Not true.
Use your
40 years
historical
later.
sources.
40
Emma-
years later,
Late
apostate,
reminiscence.
McClellan's left the church.
biased.
He's an apostate.
Emma would have talked to him.
Would Emma have confided that detail with him?
Is there a Calgary quote?
Yeah.
That,
Yeah. So that's our fourth corroborating thing. Are there other sources, right? So that comes into play here. Yeah. The transaction sounds so scandalous. In a three years later, he wrote another letter clarifying. He said that Emma said that she saw the sealing take place. She said she saw the sealing take place.
Which means they're not alone.
They're not alone in the barn. Right. Innuendo, insinuation, right. Through the crack of the door. Did she? Didn't she? This is our only source on it. Direct.
Yeah,
So let's
third
do
party.
this. Let's do another.
Yeah.
So my favorite polygamy website. You guys have a favorite polygamy website? Is josephsmithspolygamy.org. Super good, super faithful, excellent. Highly recommend it. This is Brian Hale's website. He's awesome. These are his words. It's obvious that Emma did not believe the ceremony was valid. Whatever happened, however she found out about it, she did find out about it. I know that. She concluded the relationship was adulterous. Ironically, Oliver Cowdery, who Joseph summoned to defuse the situation apparently, sided with Emma, discounting the validity of the polygamous marriage and later referring to it as, quote, a dirty, nasty, filthy scrape. Oliver's vitriol may have been intensified due to his frustrations from recent leadership changes that diminished his overall importance. He'd been sort of pushed out to the edges of civilization out there in Missouri, while Sidney Rigdon was now the right-hand man. Maybe there was some angst and jealousy or whatever there. Emma immediately turned Fanny out of the house, kicks her out. Later on, in 1838, after he'd been excommunicated, or at the time period he was about to be excommunicated actually, this is January, he wrote to his brother Warren Cowdery, who was out of the church at the time. I did not fail to affirm, when he was being questioned by the council, that what I had said was strictly true. A dirty, nasty, filthy, scrape, scratched out, affair, overwritten, of his and Fanny Alger's was talked over, in which I strictly declared that I had never deviated from the truth on it. So Joseph does not explain the doctrine of plural marriage to Oliver Cowdery at the time. Isn't that crazy? Doesn't explain it to Emma at the time.
how does he get Oliver to diffuse the situation without an explanation?
Maybe that's why it didn't work very well. Help me out here, Oliver. It's like, no, that kind of looks like what I was saying. So you believe that? This is the court in the history of the church. This is why Oliver Cowdery was excommunicated. The 4 reasons. Number 2 is this character destruction by insinuating, suggesting that Joseph is guilty of adultery. It was the Fanny Alger affair. Scrape.
Do you have any record on Fanny's perspective?
Yeah, good question. Following the prophets, counsel, the Alger family left for Missouri in September 1836. accompanied by Fanny. 2 months later, in Wayne County, Indiana, she married a non-member named Solomon Custer. She remains separate from the saints for the rest of her life. Late in life, she reportedly rebuffed questions about her relationship with Joseph Smith. Quote, "That's all a matter of my own and I have nothing to communicate." Benjamin F. Johnson said she did not turn from the church, nor from her friendship for the prophet while she lived. She just no longer associated. That's it. That's all we know. Question number 4. Why was there such a long period between the first plural wed and the second plural wed? That's why. Fanny, all that's happening sometime here-ish, maybe in 1834 here-ish. And then comes all this like stuff, right? Liberty Jail, all that stuff coming to Nauvoo, everyone gathered, goes to Washington, then Dr. Baptism for the Dead, picks the spot for the temple revelation, things are starting to slow down. Joseph marries Louisa Beeman, second part. So that's probably why there was so much time in between. But I also think that if you ask Joseph, so after the old Fanny Alger experience, what do you think? So that confirms how much I did not want to do this. I have wounded my dear wife, and one of my best friends has now turned against me. I hate it. You know? So I don't think he was anxious to take that second one. So why did he take the wife right there? Remember, the angel came 3 times between 1834 and 1842. I would put this as, it's my own thought, this is angel number 2. It's like, okay, we're slowing down, now the temple's now coming out of the It's like, all right, Joseph, time to get busy again. It's like, okay. 5th of April, 1841, Joseph marries Louisa Beeman. Right after, I would say. Question number 5. How many wives does Joseph eventually have? About 35, best we can confirm. These are their names. We'll come back to those. Question number 6. Why were some of Joseph's plural wives already married to other men? Shoot! This is where it gets modern. Well, a lot of people left the church because of this one. Or so they say. This is their, I would say, the surface reason. But let's investigate. Let's investigate. I would not hold this back from your students. Joseph was sealed to 14 women who were already legally married to husbands. These ones.
Ooh, Mary Elizabeth Rollins was one of the ones that saved the Doctrine and Covenants, wasn't she?
Yeah. Yeah. She was married to a non-member when Joseph was sealed to her. Why did he do that?
How many of those were not married? Or maybe we're going to get to non-members. How many of those? 14?
How many were married to non-members? I don't know the answer to that question. Several? Yeah.
How many of these were after his death? Or are all of these during his lifetime?
I believe these are all during his lifetime. Then there's some sealed posthumously, right? Why did he do that? Enemies of the church think they know. Duh. Why else would he do that? Not so fast. There are 3 reasons that I would share. One is the doctrinal reason. Marriage in the new and everlasting covenant is essential for exaltation. Some faithful, active women were married to non-members, inactive members, or faithless men. Being sealed to Joseph as plural wives for eternity only would allow all worthy women to be sealed to an eternal husband for her exaltation in eternal worlds, in spite of their living husband's faithlessness. Now, this is interesting. You have to remember, keep in mind, doctrinally, marriage sealings for the dead are not yet a part of the theological picture yet. So you wouldn't just say, well, wait till they're dead and seal them together, and then hopefully the husband works out. If not, then it'll be figured out. That's kind of what we do today, right? But there was this felt urgency for these women to receive that ordinance in this life. And if their husband showed no prospect of actually like stepping up, then what were they to do? These faithful women. So first one's like a doctrinal reason. Second one is situational reason. So for example, it seems that some women chose Joseph rather than their legal husband to be with in eternity. For example, one of his plural wives, Ruth Vos Sayers, was the legal wife of Mr. Sayers. Mr. Sayers, not attaching much importance to the theory of a future life, the husband insisted that his wife Ruth should be sealed to the prophet for eternity, that he himself should only claim her in this life. She was accordingly sealed to the prophet in Emma Smith's presence, and thus became numbered among the prophet's plural wives. That's in Ruth's own biography. So that's bizarre from our current perspective, right? So far we've heard the phrase repeated twice, eternity only, eternity only. No implications for this life, both doctrinal and situational, which I think then adds to our third reason, which is emotional. Perhaps Joseph prefers this eternity only approach because it allows him to be obedient to the commandment on the one hand, while essentially guaranteeing there would be no sexuality in the relationship. It's like the opposite of what the enemies of the church think. He's just schmoozing other men's wives and trying to get in there. It's the opposite. The absence of sexuality in these sealings would provide emotional protection for Joseph and Emma's relationship. He's technically obeying it, but Emma's not, involved physically. That's obviously the painful part of plural marriage, is the shared sexuality. So, in this period here, Joseph is sealed in several eternity-only sealings. I think 8 out of his 9 sealings, there were 9 total, 8 of them were eternity-only. This was like his preferred approach right there. It's like, all right, we're going to do it like that. This is the loophole he's figured out. So that's how we're going to do this. And there are plenty of faithful women with not as faithful husbands, or husbands that are offering their wives. Great. I can look the angel in the eye and be like, I'm doing it. But the enemies of the church do what? So before we push the scandal button, okay, I just want to consider the following. Before you touch that button, consider this. To me, this is really compelling. Really compelling. Number one, none of these women ever complained. Here's the more remarkable thing. None of their husbands ever complained or left any grievances on record against Joseph. Here's a little warranty. None of the witnesses or officiators made any protest. What was it? No one saw any impropriety in it. None of the apostates, this one's even more curious, in Nauvoo ever brought this up. Their anti-Mormon attacks never brought this up. No evidence of any criticism by anyone in that first generation about this practice. And yet it's like the silver bullet of the antis today. Those trying to show scandal with Joseph Smith. Many people, like I said, have had their testimonies rocked because of this. Because the insinuation is always scandal, 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 sex, 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 impropriety, impropriety. When it's actually very, very likely, I feel like 99-point-something% sure, no impropriety. Actually, avoiding sex is why he did this.
Maybe they're
and for the salvation of those women.
Maybe they're the people who are committing adultery for real. You know how, like, a lot of times what your problem is, you like put it out.
Right. People interpret Joseph through the lens of their own immoral lifestyle. I think that totally happens.
When you say that on here, are you talking about polygamy or polyandry?
Polyandry.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, no one brings polyandry up.
Okay.
Polyandry.
The one woman having multiple husbands. Instead of polygyny, one man having multiple women. It's the opposite. No one ever brings the fact that Joseph is marrying other men's wives up as like something against him.
In other words, that's a issue that has manifested itself just in recent history.
Yeah, it's been reinterpreted in our day to be something that it obviously wasn't in the original day. Yeah.
Joseph sending people off on mission.
Send them off on mission so we can marry their wives.
Gotcha.
But this eternity-only approach to marriage doesn't last long. You know why?
The third of
So the angel came 3 times, I'm over this, but 3 times, 1842, this time with a sword. Clever Joseph, very clever, right? The last time he came with the sword in his hand. It says if you don't do it fully, right, is how I interpret this, then I will, this is it, it's last chance. So now we get sword-wielding angel. Sword-wielding angel right there. And guess what happens historically? Joseph starts to marry unmarried women. Yeah, they change for the most part there to unmarried women due to John C. Bennett's slanderous writings after he been excommunicated right there in 42. No more marriages were entered into in 42. He waits until the beginning of the next year. Then he enters into a number of them. They resume in earnest and continue until November of that year. There is evidence of sexuality in 9 of those. 9 of those marriages. It's documented. The angels do it for real. There's 4 purposes for this, Joseph. You're missing one of them with those eternity only ones.
And is he the only one practicing this at this time?
No, now 1843, I believe, he starts to introduce it to other leaders. Yeah. Maybe 42. 41, he was alone. I believe 42 is where it starts with a few, and then 43 becomes pretty widespread. Question number 7. If sexuality was part of at least some of his plural marriages, are there any children from those other wives?
None.
None found.
Alright, so these are the women that there is sexuality with, because they said there was. That's pretty good evidence. This one's slightly challenging because she's also one of the women. By the way, so what's the blue mean again, or the purplish?
Married.
They're already married to other men. Notice the ones that we have documented sexuality with are not married to other men, except for Sylvia Sessions. Sylvia Sessions' husband left her. Joseph then married her, and there was sexual relationship. And then Joseph died, and then her husband came back afterwards. So they didn't really need to be remarried because they were already sort of married. Divorce wasn't a thing. He just left and never. So Joseph. Does that make sense? So that's why that one's slightly fuzzy. But other than that, there's no solid, unambiguous evidence of sexuality with any of these other wives that had already been married to other husbands, but definitely evidence on the ones that were not married to other men. As far as children then from those wives, Mary Elizabeth Rollins Smith, she says, I don't know about his having children, but I heard of 3 that he was the father of. I heard of 3. In fact, Sylvia Sessions, she had a daughter who she named Josephine, who was born right around the time that Joseph could have been the dad. And later in her life she said, Josephine, you are the daughter of Joseph Smith. That's pretty good.
Is Joseph
But then-
in posterity?
Yeah, they're up here in Utah, and the DNA testing's been done, and negative. So
Was her other husband back in the picture at that point?
it's right as Joseph dies, and then husband comes back soon
Yeah.
after. So it's
I get it.
ambiguous as to
Yeah.
paternity. But at least Sylvia believed it was Joseph's child.
Mm-hmm.
Usually on your deathbed, you don't just whip stuff up. Right? Hey, Josephine. Okay. So we don't know about that. There are about 20 claims of children, 8 of which are solid claims. These have all been DNA tested and all have come back negative. So that's it.
So they tested, we have Joseph's DNA, and then they tested the DNA of a living,
Descendant of any of these.
nothing.
Nothing.
Okay.
Lucy Walker says in the 1870s, she's talking with the sons of Joseph and Emma about this, because for a time the Community of Christ people, RLDS at the time, did not believe Joseph practiced polygamy. That was one of their big arguments against. If he really did, how come there's no children? So one of his wives weighs in on this. They seemed surprised that there was no issue of children from asserted plural marriages with their father. Could they but realize the hazardous life he lived after that revelation was given, they would comprehend the reason. He was harassed and hounded and lived in constant fear of being betrayed by those who ought to have been true to him. What do you read between the lines of it?
He didn't have the time.
There's not a lot of time to be physical with those women. although 9 of them said it was. But you know the miracle of the timing and all that stuff, it has to, things have to be just right. This would be a great time to launch into that with your students. Talk about,
Menstrual cycles?
psych, yeah. George Reynolds, Secretary to Wilford Woodruff, says the reason generally assigned by the wives themselves that there was no posterity is that owing to the peculiar circumstances by which they were surrounded, they were so nervous and in such constant fear that they did not conceive. It is known, however, that one at least did become pregnant but miscarried. So they ascribed to fear the fact that they wouldn't. And I've heard of that kind of thing being the case with, my wife's got a really good friend who had a hard time getting pregnant, her husband, and after, how's the story go? I want to tell it correctly. Basically, when they stopped focusing on getting pregnant, it was just relaxed. When it was more relaxed, then they got pregnant like pretty soon. It's when they decided to adopt. It's like, we're going to adopt. Apparently we can't have kids. And then when they decide to adopt, what happens? Boom.
Yeah.
And their fertility experts like, that happens all the time. For some reason, I don't know if that's why. There's something about trying too hard or being too nervous. I don't know how it works, okay?
I think it's hormones.
What's that?
I think it's hormones, right?
That what it is?
Getting pregnant is largely based on whether or not your body is in the right hormonal state. And so if you're under a lot of stress, then your hormones are often out of whack.
Write that in your margins.
Sorry,
Good.
guys.
Segue to hormones. Women hormones.
Question number 8.
It's on YouTube now.
Question number 8, yeah. How did Joseph propose to his wives? That seems awkward. Did he have a consistent pattern of proposing? Here's one. Benjamin F. Johnson, this is a great example of it. On Sunday, April 2nd, President Smith took me by the arm for a walk, leading the way to a secluded spot within the adjacent grove, where, to my great surprise, he commenced to offer me the principle of plural or celestial marriage. But I was more astonished by his asking me for my sister, Elmira, to be his wife. I sincerely believed him to be a prophet of God, and I loved him as such, and also for the many evidences of his kindness to me. Yet such was the force of my education and the scorn that I felt unvirtuous, that under the first impulse of my feelings I looked him calmly, but firmly in the face, and told him that I always believed you to be a good man, wished to believe it still, and would try to, and that I would take for him a message to my sister. And if the doctrine was true, all would be well. But if I should afterwards learn that it was offered to insult or prostitute my sister, I would take his life. I will kill you, Joseph. With a smile, he replied, Benjamin, you'll never see that day. And you shall live to know that it's true, and rejoice in it. Here's another example. My brother Demick told me what Joseph had told him regarding plural marriage. Joseph didn't come until afterwards. The Lord had revealed to Joseph that he was to marry me. I received it from Joseph through my brother Demick. Question, is a man who's trying to take advantage of women, would it be a good approach to go through the protectors of her chastity? That'd be a good idea.
Not if he wanted to live.
Right? The historical record doesn't jive with the accusations of what Joseph's motives are. Right? It's beautiful, you know? Another one, Lucy Walker
your
Smith.
blessing.
Although you are a prophet of God, he proposes to her, you could not induce me to take a step of so great importance unless I knew that God approved my course. I would rather die, she says to Joseph. Every feeling of my soul revolted against this. Abrahamic test. Joseph said, God Almighty bless you. You shall have a manifestation of the will of God concerning you, a testimony that you could never deny. It was near dawn, after another sleepless night, when my room was lighted up by a heavenly influence. The words of the prophet were indeed fulfilled. My soul was filled with a calm, sweet peace that I never knew. Supreme happiness took possession of me, and I received a powerful and irresistible testimony of the truth of plural marriage. If they felt uncomfortable, he would not move forward until they felt comfortable. Receive their own manifestation. Maybe the most dramatic and funny is Mary Elizabeth Leitner. She says, I wasn't sealed to him until I had a witness. I had been dreaming for a number of years that I was his wife. I thought I was a great sinner. I prayed to God to take it from me, for I felt it was a sin. But when Joseph sent for me and he told me all these things, well, said I, don't you think it was an angel of the devil that told you these things? That's what she says to Joseph. Said he, no, it was an angel of God. Well, I talked with him for a long time, and finally I told him I would never be sealed to him until I had a witness. Said he, you shall have a witness. Well, Brigham Young was with me. He said, do you know what Joseph said? Since we left the office, the angel appeared to him and told him that he was well pleased with him and that you should have a witness. The angel told Joseph, you're going to get your witness. I made it a subject of prayer and I worried about it because I did not dare to speak to a living being except Brigham Young. I went out and I got between 3 haystacks where no one could see me. I knelt down, and if ever a poor mortal prayed, I did. A few nights after that, an angel of the Lord came to me. And if ever a thrill went through a mortal, it went through me. I gazed upon the clothes and figure, but the eyes were like lightning. They pierced me from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet. I was frightened almost to death for a moment. I tried to waken my aunt, but I could not. The angel leaned over me, and the light was very great, although it was night. Joseph came up the next Sabbath. He said, have you had a witness yet? Said I have not had a witness. But I have seen something I never saw before. I saw an angel, and I was frightened almost to death. I didn't speak. He studied a while. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He looked up at me and said, how could you have been such a coward? Said I was weak. Did you think to say, Father, help me? No. Well, if you had just said that, your mouth would have been open, for that was an angel of the living God. I said, well, if that was an angel of light, why didn't he speak to me? You covered your face, and for this reason, the angel was insulted. He'd gone apparently to Joseph and told him about what happened. Said I, will it ever come again? He thought a moment and then said, no, not the same one. But if you're faithful, you shall see greater things than that. And then he gave me 3 signs of what would take place in my own family. Every word came true. I went forward and was sealed. That was funny. That was just funny. He leaned over. Apparently she's like, and that was it. Is she lying? She telling the truth.
That was a long time afterwards.
It was at BYU. She was like one of the last living witnesses of this. She was like this old lady then. They invited her to speak at BYU. Said BYU speeches. That was a long time afterwards. So, what are you going to do with it? Question 9. How does Emma Smith feel about and deal with plural marriage? You know the answer?
It was hard.
It was hard, yeah. It tried her faith even as Abraham. Besides his first marriage to Fanny Alger, it seems like Emma is unaware of any of the other marriages so far. Until May 1843. Emma struggles mightily to accept the doctrine and the practice of plural marriage. In May 1843, Emma gave Joseph 4 wives finally, the Partridge sisters and the Lawrence sisters. He was already married to the Partridge sisters, but he said, let's just go along with this. So they went through the ceremony again. Joseph said, you pick my wives. And she did. She chose those 4. Emily Partridge says, this is one of the Partridge sisters that's married, Emily Partridge Smith. Emma was present at our sealing. She gave her free and full consent. She had always, up to this time, been very kind to me and my sister Eliza, who was also married to the prophet Joseph Smith with Emma's consent. But ever after their ceremony, she was our enemy. She used every means in her power to injure us in the eyes of her husband and before strangers, and in consequence of her abuse, we were obliged to leave the city to gratify her. But things were overruled otherwise, and we remained in Nauvoo. My sister Eliza found a home with the family of brother Joseph Coolidge, and I went to live with sister Sylvia Lyons. Another one of the plural one. Joseph Lee Robinson. There was a time when Emma became very angry and said she would leave and was making preparations to go to her people in the state of New York. It came close to breaking up his family. However, he succeeded in saving her at that time, but the prophet felt dreadfully bad over it. Almost ended his marriage. So, in the spring of 1843, Emma briefly accepts the principle, gives Joseph those 4 women. They almost immediately rejects it, becomes bitter. And then in November of 1843, they have an agreement after the revelation. By November of 1843, Joseph doesn't enter into any more plural marriages. Apparently they had some sort of a deal. And he upheld that after November 1843. There was also a concern that when Joseph dies, who gets the inheritance? He has 35 wives. Like, that's going to leave Emma in poverty. So he agrees right then and there. He says, that's a concern? She says, yeah. So he writes out some deeds right then, deeds her like the Maid of Iowa, which was the boat that went up and down the Mississippi, and deeded a bunch of land of the church to her after his death to make sure she was totally set up. How about that? William Clayton said there was just a lot of tears between Joseph and Emma about this issue. It was hard for everybody. The next day, Joseph and Emma come to an agreement. It seems the agreement consisted of requiring Joseph to ask Emma's permission before any marriages were made, a promise that Emma would be financially supported in the event of his death, to assuage her fear about the other wives robbing the inheritance. William Clayton says, Joseph told me to deed all the unencumbered lots to Emma and the children. He appears much troubled about Emma. The next day's entry reads, this a.m. Joseph sent for me, and when I arrived he called me up to his private room with Emma, and there stated an agreement they had mutually entered into. They both stated their feelings on many subjects and wept considerable. Oh, may the Lord soften her heart that she may be willing to keep and abide by this holy law. So, just before Joseph goes to Carthage, she expresses her desire, as you know, to be everything that God wants me to be for you, to stand in my place at your side, seeming to have this implicit, like, I'm ready and willing to follow, section 132. Does the Lord have a blessing for me? And Joseph says, you know this part, right? Write down whatever blessing you would hope for from God, and I'll sign it when I get back. As you know, sadly, next time she saw him, he had been shot. But it seems like their marriage ended in reconciliation there, at least in mortality, right? They had been sealed, as I said, in May 1843, and then in September 28, 1843, Joseph records in his journal that he and Emma received the highest and holiest ordinance that there is. So their calling election had been made sure by 28th of September. So whatever people want to say about Emma and her reticence to go with the Saints West, and to her difficulties with Brigham Young, because Brigham Young is saying that certain church property is the church's. She's saying, no, that's family property, and there's some friction there, and Brigham's saying things to try to distance people from Emma. He's going to disband the Relief Society, so her influence is gone. And then there's going to be some years in Utah where people are, might be on the fence. It seems like Brigham's concerned they might leave and go back to Nauvoo, be with that group. So there's kind of some anti-Emma rhetoric during that first era here. Kind of defense mechanism, it seems like. Whatever people want to say about her, I would just remember that they ended on great terms, and they had their calling election made sure on the 28th of September 1843. And Emma did not commit sin whereby to shed innocent blood. And so Joseph and Emma are going to be fine as far as that goes. So, beautiful. Question 10. Why did Joseph marry some women without Emma knowing about it? This is probably like the second worst thing. First worst thing, he married other men's wives. Second worst thing, he didn't tell Emma. What's up with that? I think the only answer to that question, it's not a slam dunk, but might be these verses here. Again, verily, verily, I say unto you, if any man have a wife who holds the keys of this power, so if there happens to be a man who holds the keys of this sealing power, and he has a wife, it's quite the hypothetical, that could only fit one person on earth at that time, and he teaches her the law of my priesthood as pertaining to these things, then she shall believe and administer unto him, or she shall be destroyed. Which again I think means being cut off from the covenant. Saith the Lord your God, for I will destroy her For I will magnify my name upon all those who receive and abide in my law. Therefore it shall be lawful in me, if she receive not this law, for him to receive all things whatsoever I the Lord his God will give unto him, because she did not believe and administer unto him according to my word. And she then becomes the transgressor. And he is exempt from the law of Sarah, which seems to be, there's debate over this, but the law of Sarah seems to be the law that the first wife needs to be consulted about the other wives. Like Sarah gave unto Abraham Hagar. He didn't say, I want to marry Hagar. Right? Sarah gave it to her. But there's debate on that, like I said. He's exempt from the law of Sarah if she rejects it, who administered unto Abraham according to the law and commanded, and who went and commanded Abraham to take Hagar away. So what do we make from that? It's kind of dense, but what do we get from that? If he teaches it to Emma and Emma does not go through with it, then what? What's the concern?
Heavy consequences.
Pretty heavy consequences. And so my own personal belief is that Joseph waited until he felt like there was an opening, a gap in her heart where he could teach this to her. The only exception to that seems to be the Fanny Alger one, the first one. Why didn't he explain it to her before the first marriage? We don't know. But definitely based on her reaction to Fanny Alger, you can see his reluctance to ever tell her again. Right? Maybe in his mind, he thought that her reaction to Fanny maybe qualified for section verse 65, that she had kind of pushed against that, therefore he was exempt from the law of Sarah, maybe. Again, this is all, like I said, not a slam dunk, but these are the only revelatory verses that concern not telling your wife about this, that there are. But verse 66 says, now as pertaining to this law, verily, verily I say unto you, I will reveal more unto you hereafter. Therefore let this suffice. Joseph, when he was done dictating, it said there's a lot more that I could say about this, but that's enough for our purposes. So perhaps there are some of the revelation that he went to the grave with about this. But just considering his life and the rest of how this played out, and the sacrifice involved, and the risks that he took, and the angel coming those multiple times, like all the information historically combines together to tell me he wasn't just sneaking around her back so he could commit adultery. You know what I mean? When you take all the evidence together, that doesn't seem like a very viable option. The evidence doesn't stack up to go that direction at all in my mind. So that one's a challenging question, honestly. That's our best scriptural go-to place.
So did she know about Fanny and then she didn't know about the rest?
Right.
She, know about the first
She knows about Fanny, doesn't know about the rest till May 1843. Doesn't know about the sealings to other men's wives, most of them. Although Ruth, both Sayers, said that Emma was there, right? So we'd have to look at the timing of that one. Wonder if that happened during that time. Don't know. It's pretty hush-hush. We have very few documents that are from that time period that are about this. Best we have is section 132 and William Clayton's journal. Other than that, almost all the reminiscence is Utah late reminiscence. Once it's out in the open here, now the wives are free to talk. Now they're being interviewed, and that's where we get a lot of the information. So unfortunately, this is a historically foggy time, especially this topic, to get at the exact inner workings of it. So, question 11, why did Joseph marry a 14-year-old girl? Let's go through these next ones kind of fast. This is like the third biggest problem with polygamy, right? Number 1, he married other men's wives. Number 2, he didn't tell Emma. Number 3, he married teenagers, like young ones.
Didn't they do that in pioneer days though?
Okay. Yeah. I always like to say, well, let's ask the 14-year-old, right? So here she is. She doesn't look 14 because she wasn't when this picture was taken. But she says that her father, Heber C. Kimball, taught her the principle of celestial marriage, and having a great desire to be connected with the prophet, Joseph, it was his suggestion, her dad's suggestion, he offered me to Joseph. This I afterwards learned from the prophet's own mouth. My father had but one ewe lamb, but willingly laid her upon the altar. Maybe a little sarcasm there. Not sure that as an adult woman, as she thought back upon that, she thought that was the best idea. But she never had any beef against Joseph. She never talked about impropriety. In fact, when they were trying to prove that there was sexual relationships with these wives, they weren't just spiritual wives, to convince the people back in Nauvoo, the RLDS people, that no, these were like legit wives, like fully wives, that she's living in Lehi at the time, and they don't interview her because they didn't have that. There was no juice there. There was nothing about that. She calls her sealing an eternity-only sealing. So again, Joseph Smith, pedophile attack cannot be substantiated by the historical evidence. He comes out just fine when you ask her, but there is a little bit of a little sarcastic, maybe a little sneer at the end there. The average age in the U.S. during the 19th century was 20 years old.
Average
Legal
age
age
for
of
marriage?
what did I say?
You mean for marriage? Or just-
Marriage, yeah. It's the average age for marriage. The legal age of consent in the U.S. at the time was much younger. Illinois was 10 years old.
Wait, what does consent mean?
Consent means that you can have your child go get married,
Make its own decision.
and they can make the decision to get married. Yeah. Here's a graph of age of husbands and wives in marriage for LDS people in Nauvoo. Lighter is wives, darker is husbands. So you can see, kind of like today, the curve is mostly here, the bulk. But there is such things as happening at this age. Not very common, but also not scandalous. One man, Greg Smith, he's a scholar on polygamy, faithful guy. He says, Joseph Smith's polygamous marriage to young women may seem difficult to understand or explain today, but in his own time, such differences were not typically an obstacle to marriage. If I can read it. The plural marriages were unusual, to say the least. The younger ages of the brides were much less so. Critics do not provide this perspective because they wish to shock the audience and have them judge Joseph by the standards of the modern era rather than his own time. This is the power of taking these things out of context, the anti-power, right? I like to liken it to a wire stripped of its sheath. Here's the fact, and here's the context of that fact, and if you take it out of its context, then it becomes a lot more shocking, right? You can make facts more shocking when you strip them of context. So, how does the concept of dynastic connections relate to plural marriage?
What does dynastic mean?
Dynastic means like creating a dynasty. A dynasty like a king and queen having their children, almost like a kingdom.
The Youngs, the Smiths.
The Young dynasty, the Smith dynasty, the Kimball dynasty, yeah. President Packer explains. In the early days of the church, the saints didn't know how to use this sealing power on behalf of the dead very well, right? Joseph was, you see him in section 128, still coming to terms with this. Similarly, it took time for the saints to understand the matter of sealings. They knew that there was a sealing, yet they didn't quite know what it was, so they began getting themselves sealed to living prophets. In April 1894, this changed. In General Conference, President Wilford Woodruff explained certain changes, and that's when we got the lineage straightened out, and we know that the sealing of families, we learned what the sealing of families is all about. Wilford Woodruff says the Spirit said, "Don't you have a father?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Why not be sealed to him?" "Does your father not have a father?" I said, "Yes." "Why not seal him to him?" And so on back, rather than trying to be sealed to a prophet of God. So they would have a lot of people get sealed to the prophet as like the end game. The idea is, if you're sealed to someone who's likely going to the celestial kingdom, then you too would go to the celestial kingdom. So you have these like family dynasties that kind of hovered around the apostles. You would want to get sealed into the apostles' family. One of my great-great-grandmas was sealed to Erastus Snow. They never like even lived by each other, but she just got sealed to him just so they were connected. Right? So that's a little bizarre in terms of our modern experience. That's not how it goes. But it seems that Joseph may well have used the sealing keys to unite families. The connection between the Smith and the Kimball family was their 14-year-old daughter. That linked the two dynasties of the Kimbells and the Smiths, right? And so there's this kind of thinking. Later on in Brigham Young's era, they actually start sealing boys to boys, not in a marriage, but like you have like adopted sons. They started calling it law of adoption. So Joseph's day was just like through marriages. That's how he was figuring to do it. In Brigham's day, he expands that to anyone could get sealed to anyone to be in that dynastic connection. Then that Wilford Woodruff's day, that kind of kills that. But that could have had something to do. We don't have a slam dunk. Yes, that's what Joseph was up to, but it seems like that could have been part of what was happening. And 13 is plural marriage a requirement for exaltation today or ever? The answer is no. Thank goodness. The law of exaltation is predicated upon one man, one woman. C, D, and C 132, 1 through 20. That's the foundation, right? Exaltation is totally possible. One man, one woman. Question 14, are those who are married in a plural marriage situation in this life going to be with their spouse in the next life? You can always hear the phrase, forced to be, right, with their spouse in the next life. And one of Joseph's wives, Lucy Walker, says, Joseph said a woman would have her choice. This is a privilege that could not be denied her. So, if she wants to be, yes. If not, things can be rearranged, sounds like. Why can men still be sealed to more than one wife today if the first wife is dead, but a woman can't be sealed to more than one husband under the same circumstances? I don't know if you've got that question in class before. Answer is, of course, she can. Right? We just have to wait until she's dead for some reason. Then we seal her to all of her former husbands. Right? Isn't that what you do when you come across grandma and she was married to 4 men? Who do you seal her to? Answer is?
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
Does that mean she's going to be with all of them the next life? Eternal polyandry?
Seems
No.
like it's up to her.
Yeah, it sounds like you do the ordinances and then there's going to be some decision making that goes on there. Why is it though, question still, well, why can a man be alive and have it done, but the wife has to be dead before it's done? Answer?
It's culturally.
Don't know yet, probably just a cultural tradition. Kind of like how come, why can't priests, someone could have asked last year, baptize in the temple? And the answer would, people got to come up with stuff like, well, sort of Melchizedek priesthood building. And I've heard people like answer that before, and then the prophet's like, it's fine. You know, the summum and bonum of that entire matter is that the one who has the keys can do stuff with that, right? So, I would suggest that's probably cultural. Yeah, there's no doctrinal reason for it. Question 16. In the next life, will a man be with his first wife who has died and his second wife to whom he was later sealed? If so, what if the first wife doesn't want to be with him? Let's talk to someone, or hear from someone who's in that situation. President Oakes. A lot of people, myself included, are in multiple marriage situations. For people who live in the belief, as I do, that marriage relations can be for eternity, then you must say, well, what will life be like in the next life when you're married to more than one wife for eternity? I have to say, I don't know. But I know that I've made those covenants, and I believe that if I'm true to the covenants, that the blessing that's anticipated here will be realized in the next life, whatever that is. I don't know. So if he doesn't know, it's probably a good idea not to.
The real question arises here is when. What if anyway, you go on saying here, like, what if one wants one way and the other way? There's where it comes from.
One wife wants the one thing and the other wife
Or
wants
the
the
wife and
opposite.
the husband have a different too. That's where the students always get that question.
These are tangled webs.
Good luck
We
with that one.
weave.
Good thing we'll be perfect in the eternities.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just saying, I don't know. Close quote. 17. Are there any secrets about polygamy that if church members knew, they would definitely leave the church? I've told you all the nitty-gritty today. Like, I don't know if there's anything I've left out. You know everything that have caused people to leave the church. But with context, it's kind of helpful. True?
Sure.
It still might be kind of disturbing. It's not like you walk away totally like, polygamy's great. But at least you can walk away saying, I don't think Joseph was in it for the wrong motives. Right? I don't think the early leaders of the church were these lustful men taking advantage of their ecclesiastical position to prey upon women, like the anti-Mormons want to make it look like, right? History doesn't back that up. So hopefully you feel settled in, like, I believe he was acting under the direction of God. This is my testimony. He was acting under the direction of God, reluctantly, uncharacteristically, reluctantly, to obey a command he did not want to live, but that the Lord obviously wanted him to do so. I believe that he was a reluctant polygamist, and that he had 100% testimony it was from God, and that's the only thing that made him actually go forward with it. So that's my conclusion after studying Joseph Smith's polygamy. That's what's come out of it. 18. What are the most trustworthy resources out there for me to study more about plural marriage? I've already told you, josephsmithspolygamy.org. It's the best site you can go to. Most, I think, unbiased. People would disagree with me on that, but that's what I'm saying. Question 19. What questions have we missed? Okay. Did we hit all the doozies? Or are there some we're missing? The answer's probably I don't know. If there is another question, because I pretty much have exhausted.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just, what percentage of the families, let's say in Nauvoo, were required, of the men were required, or asked, or commanded to do this?
Is that on the gospel topic essay? I feel like.
Because that might help with some perspective too.
Yeah.
So I
People
looked
think
into
Mormons say,
Nauvoo,
but-
I think the number 3's coming to my mind.
I was like,
Fill in a 3.
Well,
but
3% or
but
30?
I think it's really small.
I think there's like a few hundred. That's the word.
in Nauvoo.
Yeah, totally involved, meaning the husbands and the wives. Total is like a few hundred. Yeah. That's like slightly buried knowledge that I'm trying to pull back up. There is research on this. It's like, but yeah, it's out of like the, how many were in Nauvoo? 15 to 20,000 in the surrounding regions as well. Yeah, a few hundred are involved. And question number 20. How are you going to explain all of this to your anti-Mormon cousin or your old mission companion who decides Joseph's polygamy is the reason for leaving the church? That's my question. Okay, obviously this is to you, not my high school students. Elder Anderson, the negative commentary about the prophet Joseph Smith will increase as we move toward the second coming of the Savior. The half-truths and subtle deceptions will not diminish, and nowhere are there subtle deceptions more than in Joseph Smith's polygamy. There will be family members and friends who will need your help. Now is the time to prepare to help others who are seeking the truth. There are people that need you to know this, especially as a religious educator. Even if you're like, I don't like this topic, I don't want to study this topic. Like, people are going to need you to know something about this topic, and or at least be able to point them to some good resources, and at least be able to see that this topic, you're very familiar with it, and you know the ins and outs of it, and you're still faithful to church. That people need that reassurance. There's too many people who say, like my friend said, he was out doing bishopric visits, and he visited this couple that had just decided to leave the church. This guy said to my friend, who's a CES man, he's like, hey, I'm not going to explain all the reasons why we're leaving the church. I don't want to hurt you. If I told you everything that I know, you would definitely leave the church. My friend's like, ooh, you know, he's like, try me, let's do this. And he's like, nah, I don't want to. But I think people need to know that you know, and that you have contextualized it in such a way that it's taken away the, instead of the wire that's loose that can shock and harm, it's a wire that's like, you know, harnessed and actually delivers power, but it's power that's productive, right? There's productive power in these facts. Yeah, please.
The essay, here's the paragraph.
Oh, you got the numbers?
By June 1844, when Joseph died, approximately 29 men and 50 women had entered into plural marriage, in addition to Joseph and his wives. When the Saints entered Salt Lake Valley in 1847, at least 196 men and 521 women had entered into plural marriage.
There you go. Thank you. That's in the gospel topics.
That's
That's
in context.
Thank you. All right. Well, that's a lot. That's heavy. It's beautiful. Learn it. Hopefully, I don't do all of this in my seminary classes, but I gave you guys the expanded version. This is what I do in my Foundations of the Restoration class. I do this with the young adults. I go through the 20 questions without digging as much in the D&C, but just trying to balance that here. Hopefully that's helpful. I'll give you all this. You can choose what to use, if any of it, if you don't want to use any of it, but hopefully that's helpful. Thank you. That's D&C 132.